So welcome once again to Thought for Action in one of our series, listening to those who have managed to do the impossible. Today we're in Peru. We're extremely happy and very excited that we're among the actual people who did the reforms in the 90s in Peru. The country that when I came to visit in 1992 was a country that was broken in pieces completely. Defaulted, it had a wave of cholera, it had an extraordinary wave of social unrest that had resulted to several thousands of people that had died in their, what they used to call their civil war, which was a terrorist attack from Sendero Luminoso, the Shining Path, and MRTA, the Movimiento Revolucionario Tupac Amaru. And then today I'm back here in 2014, and I have to tell you, I've had a hard time identifying my way around Lima because it's a completely different country and a different city. And we're here to actually witness how did that happen. It is true that we all, in crisis, when we are in countries that are striking economic crisis, we tend to think that there's no end, there's no future, or there's no light at the end of the tunnel. But we do have very good examples of actual changes and transformations. So among us, we have, to my right, Roberto Abusada. Roberto Abusada, who has been one of the leaders since the 80s in trying to change the culture of this country in towards a more, let's say, open and efficient country, and a country that is better to its own people versus a country that was better only to 2% of its own people. And then to my left, we have Jaime Yoshiyama, another extraordinary leader of reforms that led a lot of the privatizations and a lot of the economic changes of the 90s. And Manuel Sotomayor, a leader of the empresarial Peruvian, how do we call this? A leader of the entrepreneurs of Peru, who has served as vice president and president of the Commission of Entrepreneurs in Peru throughout the 90s. So let's start with Roberto. Roberto, you have been a minister, vice minister of finance and of trade in the 80s. Then in the 90s, you were leading the economics team with the Minister of Finance and drafted all sorts of reforms. And you were the shadow minister and the actual minister many times. I would like to know, and I'm sure every one of our audiences has received some of their messages the days before, knowing that we will be talking to you. The question was, why did the reforms actually happen in the 90s and not in the 80s?
Well, Elena, that's a question which is difficult to answer. But I would say that remember that Latin America has been in the center of a strife between the Soviet Union and the West, in the sense that many of our problems have been developed in the realm of this, in the context of this ideological war. So, and I think that in the 80s, Peru still had the influence of the old-fashioned policies of forced industrialization that are the inheritance of things that happened after the war. Every country wanted to industrialize without respect, irrespective of their size and their
the
position
comparative
of
advantages.
The world, comparative advantages. Having said so, I think that there was much opposition from the entrepreneurial class to change the model in the 80s, because actually it was a furious opposition, because they felt very comfortable to deal directly in the halls and lobby of the ministries, directly with people in power, obtain protection, and make a lot of money without much effort. In fact, we had many firms that were very, very prosperous, but if you would have computed their balance sheets at international prices, probably they were not producing anything. They had negative value added or something like that. Now, the 90s was different, the different scenario. In the 90s, when Fujimori was elected, there was previous to his election, there was a big debate on how to change the country and how to confront the chaos, really. Okay. And I think out of that debate,
give us some numbers of the chaos so people can relate?
Yes. Well, we in 1989 and 1990, we were living within probably one of the most dire hyperinflations in monetary history. So I would say that just to give you an example, even though inflation started to be controlled in the 90s, still 1990 had an inflation rate of more than 7,000%. Okay, so inflation would be measured by the day and not by the year. But to make it a little bit more tangible, for somebody in Europe or in Greece that is probably listening to us, 7,000%. You know, in Greece we've been hit with a lot of numbers, and we need to understand it. So, let's say I would go buy a pencil, and by the time I would walk into the store and walk out of the store, the probability of the pencil's value to have increased was 100%, right? Yeah.
So you would buy it by $1, and then you would go in the cashiers, and it would be like $2.
It would bring the economy to a halt. Okay, but just to give you an idea, the name of our currency, it's sol, which means sun, and now we have what it's called the nuevo sol. But between the two, we had another currency name, which was the Inti, which means again sun, but in the Quechua language, in the original language of Peru. The old sol was converted into the Inti by taking 3 zeros by striking 3 zeros.
And that was in the 80s?
Yeah, at the end of the 80s. And then to convert it into the new sol, we struck 6 zeros. So in fact, 1 sol of today, a new sol, is equivalent to a billion soles antiguos. Okay, which is something that it's mind-boggling. When I say a billion, I say it in the American sense.
Yeah.
Elena, let me interrupt. You said they gave the example of the pencil. It was not in dollars. It was in local currency.
In local, I just make it in.
No, it's not that $1 and you went out and the value was $2. No, it was the same $1, and in the local currency it was twice. Okay,
very good point.
And I remember that supermarkets, they had to close, say, at 7 o'clock night instead of closing, say, 10 o'clock, and took about 6 hours to change prices every night. The whole supermarket. You go to a store and buy a pencil, and the price says 100, and then next day, they work 3 or 4 hours to change all the prices of the supermarket. So you go there next day, and it's 200.
Wow.
That was and I remember that when you take a taxi, say a taxi takes half an hour to go to your destination, you can arrange 100, but by the time you are leaving the taxi, you have to pay 150 because of the fact that during this time.
This is the best way of explaining it in a way for actually.
It's amazing. It was amazing. No?
Yeah. Our European audience, especially our Greek audience, can understand the taxi better because we do use often cabs. They're relatively inexpensive. They cost slightly more than you would have, a little more than your public transportation. Imagine all those people going in with €3 and wanting to get out, and they have to actually pay 5.
Well, actually, many people were describing Peru at that time as a failed
state.
Okay, because it was not only hyperinflation. We had lived through a period of terrorism, which really made life totally unstable for the Peruvian family. And on top of that, we were severed from the international financial system for probably 5 years. We had been severed from the international system. So in fact, we had no credit. We couldn't resort to the international financial institutions. We were declared ineligible for the International Monetary Fund support because we were in arrears with them and with the World Bank and with the IDB.
We were in arrears with them. It means that we had not, the country had not paid any of its debt back to the World Bank and the IMF.
It was unilateral.
It was unilateral decision not to pay, and as a result, the World Bank and the IMF and the Inter-American Development Bank were not.
So you asked what's the difference between the 80s and the 90s, and in fact is that we were looking at the abyss, and when you look at the abyss, you do what you have to do, and so there were policies that were unheard of in any country. For example, gasoline prices, they were raised by almost 4,000% overnight. Okay.
Formally.
Yes.